Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, William Harris here, founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I'm interviewing the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. Excited about the guest that I have here today, Sarah Levinger. Sarah is a Forbes featured consumer behavior analyst, creative strategist, and performance creative consultant. To date, she has helped hundreds of e-commerce brands increase their paid advertising ROI using psychology-based creative and has worked with brands such as Fabletics, Obvi, and Original Grain. And I was trying to think about who introduced us. And the first time that I remember meeting you, we were on a panel together and you and I were chatting even before the show. I was going through my music. I don't remember what the panel was, but we spoke together on a panel. And I remember, I was like, this girl's smart. I really like her. And I want to follow up and talk to her a little bit more.
Thank you.
I apologize for not remembering it, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. To your credit, I can't remember either. I feel like D2C has changed so much in the last couple of years.
Seriously.
And I can't, sometimes I just can't even remember my own name. So thank you. I'm right there with you. It's been nuts. This is just a nutso time to be in this industry. So I'm excited though to chat.
Well, I'm excited. Me too. And we're going to talk about like ad psychology and some of the things that people are getting wrong right now about advertising in a little bit. I do want to announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million. And we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, on to the exciting stuff. I want to start with your backstory. It's where I always start. How did you get to where you are? What made you say, hey, I'm going to dedicate my time and my energy to ad creative?
I always feel bad when people ask me this question because it was entirely by accident. I didn't actually mean to come over here and hang out with all of you awesome people. I was very lucky that I did, but I started originally in my 20s as a freelancer, and I was just doing like generalized marketing. So lots of blog posts, and I did WordPress websites and Amazon FBA and email marketing and SMS. Like I just was kind of all over the place because I kept having people ask me, do you know how to do Facebook ads? Do you know how to do this and this and this? And I would always say yes, even though I had no idea how to do them, because that's what you do as an entrepreneur. So I had to, I'm sure you've heard the story before, but I had to learn how to do all of those things.
Sure.
So I went to the library because Sarah hates truncated information. I have a really hard time learning online because it's so small. Like they give you a bite of what it is, and I need all of it. Like give me the whole thing. So I was going to the library to pick up books on all of these different things that I needed to learn to do my job as a freelancer. And right next to kind of like all of the technical information was psychology and consumer behavior and like all these really interesting books. And so I was just picking up books because they looked interesting. And I did that for 10 straight years because I'm crazy. And if you've ever been to a library, you know, the library just has a lot of like 1980s textbooks and like the weirdest, most random books that you've never even heard of. So I was lucky enough that I got to study for a long, long time, 10 straight years of tons of psychology and neuroscience and interesting things. And then fast forward to COVID, I had 2 babies at home and I was like dying. I was like, I need to talk to some people. I'm going to lose my mind over here. So I randomly got on Twitter and started just chatting because I was like, I need friends. And that just grew into what this is today. So it was entirely by accident. I just started sharing like, this is an interesting psychology hack that you could apply to advertising. And then people got really excited about it. So well, now I'm perfect.
A lot of the best things in life, though, are, let's say, based around opportunity rather than forethought, and just 100%. Being able to say, okay, this is here, let's take it and run with it. And so I got into this by accident as well. And so I love hearing about people who just said there was this thing that sat there right in front of me and I jumped on it.
Serendipitous. So serendipitous too, because I had assumed that everybody in marketing had the same psychology knowledge that I did. And I don't know why I assumed that. I just was like, everybody probably already knows this. So I'm just sharing it because for no reason at all. And then it turned out that I was a media buyer at the time. And I was working with a lovely friend of mine who owned a small agency, and he was like, here's the thing. You're not that great of a media buyer, but you are a very, very good creative strategist. Like, you're so good at creative, and everything that you design and we run hits really well and has good longevity to it. So from there, I started developing kind of like a duplicatable system, because I was doing a ton of research up front before I even started creating, just because I found it interesting. I just liked diving into the customer base and understanding what they wanted and what they needed. So anyways, it was quite interesting because I didn't mean to do it, but it's been so amazing. Like, I can't tell you how lucky I am to have the job that I do and like be able to do what I do on a daily basis. So I'm so happy.
It may have felt offensive when somebody's like, yeah, you're actually not that great of a media buyer. But here's the thing that I love about that. I remember earlier in my career running Element, where I would bang my head against the wall sometimes because some of my media buyers were extremely logical and they could do these amazing things. But they had zero creativity whatsoever in their bodies. And then there were other ones that was like, this is the most amazing ad I've ever seen, but you didn't even exclude, previous customers or whatever. And there's what I started realizing though is like finding how, like, as a good coach, you got to look and say, okay, I love basketball metaphors. Let's say you've got somebody that's 5 foot and you're putting them in the NBA. Don't put them at the post position as a center. They're not going to thrive there. That's not where their natural gift set is. And so I think that's the same for, us as media buyers too, where you might be 60-40, 50-50, or 90-10 weighted towards creative or logic. And that's okay to recognize where your strengths and weaknesses are and say, I'm going to really go in on this because this is something that I have a gift at that other people don't get.
Yeah. And I would love to encourage anybody who's like currently struggling in their job to really take a look at what you actually find enjoyable, right, about your job. Because there's going to be pieces of it that you have to do. I hate the admin work that comes with my job as, a freelancer consultant, but I have to do it. It's just a part of the job. Now, that doesn't mean though that like I focus heavily on trying to get better at like my books or taxes. I hire someone to do that. I think it's important that all of us kind of try and stick ourselves in that right spot, like sweet spot for us, which is difficult sometimes because I understand some people don't have the flexibility of movement that I did. I was lucky enough that it was just me and I didn't have like a whole bunch of employees. I didn't have a lot of like extra hanging on that I needed to move around. It was just wherever you want to go, you can go. So it was interesting too, because that kind of led to a lot of these really interesting things that I had never had an opportunity to do before. So as you said, to your point, it's really important, I think, that you build up skill set, because opportunity really is kind of the crossroads between like skill set and right time, right place. So just luck and skill more than anything else. But without the skill part, you won't be ready for it. Like opportunity will come and you won't know how to handle it or you won't know what to do with it. So it's really important to have both, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so digging into your unique skill set of the psychology of ad creative, one of the things that you had told me about when we were talking before is that there's this giant miscommunication in the industry. What is this miscommunication?
Yeah, I don't want to like burst anyone's bubble, but I want everyone to start to kind of realize that we have been heavily placing all of our marketing efforts on the technical side of what we can control, when in reality, everyone is purchasing based upon subconscious motivators and all kinds of experiences and lots of deep, deep emotions that they're having. And it's all basically predetermined. And this is based upon neuroscience that's come out that says 95% of our daily decisions are being made from the subconscious mind, which is the one that we cannot control. It's one that just records things constantly. So in relationships to ads, we don't control much, honestly. I'm sorry for anybody who's listening. We don't control almost any part of this. Now, there are things that we can put in place to basically speak to the subconscious as much as we possibly can. And I see a few psychology things being used in this industry, but there's a huge amount of psychology that we're just missing out on, which is so important because, again, it's not technical anymore. Like, everybody's making decisions based upon emotion. Everybody.
Yeah. And so what are some of the biggest areas that you see people using psychology well right now?
Yes. Oh, okay. So one of the best that I've seen actually is True Classic. And Ben over there he's just a marketer. Like the guy knows some stuff. Very, very well-versed guy. He's just very talented in general. But I love the way that he has kind of directed his team to prioritize psychology first. So every time you see an ad from True Classic, it's not necessarily talking about the shirt or the benefit of the shirt itself, the softness or, even the cut and the fit is like just a little bit of it. But in general, they talk a lot about dad bod, which I found really interesting because I haven't seen a t-shirt like brand do this before, where they talk about a cultural or a lifestyle issue before they start talking about a benefit or a feature of the actual brand itself. So they are just crushing it. And I'm seeing like pockets of other little brands doing this as well. Obvi's doing it really, really well. One of the brands that I just worked with a couple weeks ago, Original Grain, is now starting to do it for their watch collection. And they're seeing amazing results just by focusing on the actual experience of the customer before they get to the brand, like the pre-experience.
So what are the parts of the customer that we need to know? So if we're making these decisions subconsciously, what is it that we're missing as technical marketers that we need to be thinking about?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so one of the things that I see most common, everybody has demographic information. We're going after a 25-year-old female who lives in Chicago. She's married, she's got 2 kids, right? Almost everybody has some sort of like psychographic information where they know maybe she's a millennial, right? Or maybe, she's really concerned about losing weight, but she doesn't know how to, those type of things. Very, very few people have tracked experiential information on their customer. And when I say experiential, I'm talking about when does this person psychologically feel the biggest emotion around her problem? Is it in front of the refrigerator when she opens the door? Is it when she's getting into her car and the seatbelt is too tight? Is it when she's putting on her pants? Is it when she's trying to find a shirt that fits? Is it when she's around other moms? Like, I want to know experientially what's happening in your life that you continuously come up against, because this kind of information is just, it's so important. Like, and you'll notice this too on the organic side. Most of the stuff that goes organically viral is talking about a specific human experience, and they just kind of added humor to it, or they added something polarizing to it, or it's shock value, right? So they've just added basically a modifier to the human experience, and then they just, expanded it. Movies do this all the time. The only thing movies do is present a human experience, basically. So I struggle with a little bit, because even with the clients that I work with, I try really hard to get them to understand all of this comes down to how well can you communicate one situational human experience and add your brand to it. Those are the brands that are going to win at the end of the day.
And I think that that's interesting. Obviously, I can remember one of the areas that people are talking about is it's like save time. It's like, and I can remember this being applied very, very poorly, even in my early days too, where it's like, okay, this thing saves you from having to do this SaaS program saves you from having to do it in Excel. And so it's like, we save you 10 hours a week. It's like, it doesn't really get into like making, like, I'm not excited about that. You're like, save you 10 hours from what? Like, that doesn't do anything to me. And so what are tips that you can use to help get, like, are there like frameworks or things that we can use to help us take it from just like, hey, you're saving 10 hours a week from having to use Excel, to like actually turning it into something that actually matters to them from a psychological perspective?
Yeah. So I use something called an NLP report. It's natural language processing. And I take down just massive amounts of reviews, and I'll put them into an Excel spreadsheet. And then I will categorize them one by one into 9 different emotional motivators. So that's the process I use. The emotional motivators came out of a book, of course, that I read by a good friend of mine. Yeah, I wish. That would be amazing. No, Will Leach actually wrote this book, I think 3-4 years ago. And I actually became good friends with him just because I loved his book, and I emailed him and I was like, how can I get this to more people? Because your work is amazing. So he and I became really good friends, but his model was based upon a bunch of psychology, and he's actually an economist. So he has like deep data level experience. And so he applied all of his work to kind of the same thing, but he does it for like Pepsi. So he's like he's a leveled up for mine, but his model worked really well for ads. So I went through and I basically adopted his model into my own framework and system, which is the NLP report that I do, From there, though, we can pull out all kinds of different things, not just the emotional motivators, but I'm also pulling out things like what I call like self-adopted terms. So everybody has this, any sort of like community or industry that they're involved in, you will have a self-adopted term that you usually use, interchangeably with everybody you work with.
Mm-hmm.
In D2C, media buyer is like a really widespread self-adopted term, but the correct term for it is technically paid, like social ad buyer, I guess, would be the long form term for it.
Sure.
But we shorten it, right? Same happens if you like beer. You're either a hophead or, like you're IPA. Like you have different words that you use for yourself. Pulling these out will help a lot because you can qualify people a lot easier, a lot faster in the ads. And you can also understand a little bit of that life experiential thing that we were talking about. So if I'm somebody who has some sort of a beverage brand and I see a lot of this like hophead terms in the reviews coming out, then we know that these people not only like hoppy beer, but we also know that they're very extremely attached to that term. I only drink hoppy, right? This is it comes out in everything. Every time I've done an NLP, it comes out. People just start to share pieces of their experience.
And I appreciate how you're tying this back to the emotional side of things too, even from the NLP. Are you familiar with the book by Neville Medhora called "This Book Will Help You Write Better"? Or this book will teach you to write better? Okay,
I read that ages ago and I loved it.
Yes,
I loved it.
Same. I want to say maybe like 2014, maybe through 2013. One of my favorite samples from that book is he talks about two letters that are identical, same paper, same envelope, same pen, same stamp, right? Everything's identical. The only difference are the words. And on the first letter, you write, "Dear Mom, I hate your guts. You've ruined my life. I hope you die. P.S. Dad sucks too." And then on the other one, you write, "Dear Mom, you have been the biggest source of inspiration for me. I owe all of my success to you. I love you, your loving son, William." And you mail both of those, and they will have a massively different, visceral, emotional reaction.
Impact.
And there's nothing different about them as far as whether they're static images or video, whether it's UGC or high produced. All of that does not matter as much as the actual psychology that was used behind 100%. That.
Yes. It all comes down to not what you're trying to say, but how you are saying it. And I tell my husband this on a daily basis because he'll come up to me and just say the most random things. And I'm like, dude, it is not what you're saying. It is how you are saying it right now that's driving me crazy. So and this applies to any human. Communication is really interesting because we're very good at producing a lot of it. We're not very good at being careful about what is in the communication. And this is, half the reason why we have all kinds of problems in the country socially.
Totally.
But it's also how we have giant disconnects between consumer and marketer, because the marketer wants to say it in a way that they think will have the best impact for bottom line retention, acquisition, and really just conversion. But in general, most of the time, consumers can see right through that.
Yeah.
They already know what you're going to say before you say it.
Yeah. Which is wild, isn't it? And I feel like this is kind of like a nice segue into something that you brought up to me before. And I don't want to spill the beans. I'll let you do that. But something about linguistic psychology with Steven Pinker. Take us through what was going on with that.
Oh my gosh. This was ages ago that we talked about this. You'll have to remind me. What was the conversation? Because I remember us talking about this, but I can't remember which direction it went.
To be completely fair, I don't remember either, other than I had this as a note. And I was like, that was good, and I want to come back to it. But I think it was just the idea of how you order them in the phrase.
Basis of it.
We were talking about how
this is going to bug me until I figure this out now.
That's okay. But I think it was something along the lines of how you order the things in the phrase that you're using. So it's not even so much about what you say, but how, what order did you say it in? Did you lead somebody from the solution to the problem? Or are you somebody from the problem to the solution?
Yes. Well, and this is really interesting because they've actually done studies on it, just outside of what Steven Pinker wrote. They've actually done a lot of studies on how you situate the words inside a sentence. Really does change how the sentence works. So the best example I can give is you can say, "We already ate, comma, grandma." right? And it just means, grandma, we already ate, we don't need food. Or you can say, we already ate grandma. And that's like really terrifying. Like you shouldn't ever say we already ate grandma. That's a very concerning sentence. So it matters. Language matters almost more than what you're trying to sell, what offer you have on the back end, like which framework, which format of ad you use. It all comes down to the language use. Because again, if you go to any other country, if you're, using Chinese, or if you're, Swedish, if you're trying to sell ads to German, like whatever it is, your language is going to have a very different take on things than you will in English. And this is, straight from science as well. There's just a ton of data that says the language that you learned as a child growing up directly impacts how you view the world as an adult. So in the English language, a lot of the times we use the term I think, especially when interacting with other people. I think all the time. Even if it's not true, we always bring up I think, which changes your brain to really accept intellectual ideas, right? Or very technical ideas over ones about I feel, which is very different. So if you look into the German languages, the Romance languages, a lot of the times they will start sentences with I feel that this is the thing. I feel that you're doing this. I feel that we should go out to tacos, like whatever it is, right?
Right.
Changes it. You're much more receptive to emotional information. So it's very important, I think, to understand that language has a lot to do with why your ads aren't working. But some of this is also how the brain has been developed, depending on what country you're in.
That's wild. It reminds me of something that I heard from a speaker a long time ago named Ray Vanderlaan, where he talked about like this Eastern versus Western way of thinking. And one of the things that he explained in this was, if you were to ask somebody to describe God and you ask like a Westerner to describe them, they'll say omniscient, omnipresent, right? Like these things that describe these attributes of him. Yeah. But if you ask like an Easterner, like to describe God, they'll say bread, water, things that you can picture. It's like you can't picture omniscience, but you can picture like these symbols. And like you said, it's like just a difference of the way that your brain has been trained based on your language from a very young age changes your perception. So I think that's interesting. I think you talked about even like for English, it's like left to right. So it's like your ad should go left to right or something along those lines, right? Something like that.
Yes. So the design also matters. Obviously, language is where we start, like the actual communication of the message. But after that, we always have to lean on what humans are built to do, which is see things. Obviously, like our eyes are in the front of our face. Like we're very visual people. It's really important, I think, that you place a lot of weight on what the image says, not necessarily what the text, what the copy is saying. Now, I know I just told you it's all about the language. But in general, the copy is secondary to what the image does, especially on platforms. And this is mostly because we're scrolling. Platforms are really interesting too, because if you ever held the phone in your hand and you start to scroll, especially on TikTok, you're going from bottom to top and all of the images are scrolling with the same motion of your hand. As soon as you click on someone's website or the link to their website, the operation is flipped. Now, usually you're going top to bottom. So the brain has to basically flip what it was doing before. The other thing it's having to do is on social media platforms, they are psychologically built to keep you on the platform. That's what they're supposed to do. And there's basically very few things you can do in there, right? They've cut down the amount of buttons, with the exception of Meta. Meta's ridiculous, but TikTok, right? Twitter, they've cut down the amount of buttons that you really can push anywhere because they don't want you to leave. So it's really odd, I find, that once we get to landing page, or even once we are just show an ad, people want to get really intense with it and just add as much stuff in there as possible. And I'm like, guys, you got to slow down. So in general, though, in English-speaking countries, like you're saying, because we read left to right, top to bottom, that's how we actually read words. The eyes will also do that for basically anything. Web pages, landing pages, emails. We also do it for ads. So we'll start at the top right. We'll kind of bounce around in a Z pattern or start at top left, and then end up at bottom right. So usually when I'm designing, I will keep that in mind. Even if everything's centered, even if I have things on the left or things on the right, I always want whatever's most important to be upper left or lower right.
So okay. Now, if somebody wanted to study to learn some more of these psychology tips and ideas that you have for this, what resources would you send to them? Is there stuff on your website? Do you have a, printed off bibliography, or, so they don't have to go to the library and check out the same books you did? Or
I have like a ton of books that I can send you if you want. I mean, we can give all kinds of different references to things. Top 5 at this point,
Sure.
definitely Will Leach's book. You have to go read Marketing the Mind States. He's probably one of the only people that I have seen easily translate emotion into marketing. Unless you're a copywriter, but even copywriters are very specific. They're only focused on the words. They're not necessarily focused on like full campaigns. So Marketing the Mind States. The second one to that would probably be, I have like a whole list on my phone. Dan Ariely has like a ton. I probably read most of his books all the time and nobody else's, because like everything he writes is amazing. Predictably Irrational was one of the best books because it just taught me a lot about myself, honestly. It has to do with kind of like the hidden forces, right, that influence our lives. Lots of really interesting studies in that one too, just about things in the room, objects, the temperature, the time of day, where the sun is at, who you were talking to before you got into kind of scroll mode. All of that will affect how you do what you do and whether or not you actually like buy things. Fascinating stuff though. I mean, I have more if you want to share, but
no, this is good. And do you like what you were just saying, like who you were talking to before you decided to buy this? I mean, it reminds me of going back to NLP stuff. It reminds me of what was that? White Collar, right? Do you remember the show White Collar? Where he talks about, he was like, what do you think? Do you have, this pen is out of ink? And he was trying to get him to choose the pink one, right? And just by using this, and it's like, it's a very gimmicky way to go about it. But do you think that there's even like these subtle things that we can use? And then I would say the follow-up, should use in our ads, or are we beginning to cross a line?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I think about this on the daily because as like an act of what I do, a lot of psychology obviously comes into play because that's, what I'm well versed in. And I constantly try and weigh the balances of, is this healthy for people? Is it safe for marketers to use these tactics to be able to get people to purchase things? We always have to remember again, though, that like, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much psychology we use in our ads, we are still talking to a very specific person who has to have a psychological propensity for it. Like they have to be already in the mode of, I need to fix this. So I truly believe it's a relationship between the two. It's a relationship between you and the consumer. And as long as you're not selling shady stuff, like things that don't actually solve a problem, I think it's very important that we start using more psychology, mostly because at this point, we're basically just throwing out stuff for people to look at. That's just nice to look at. That doesn't have any sort of impact in their life. Using psychology in your ads, you can connect with somebody a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot cheaper, but you can also help them a lot faster. And that's the reason I got into this industry, is just, I want to help people find things that will solve big, deep-seated issues in their life, because really, finding a true classic shirt might change that man's entire life. He might get a different job because he bought a different shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, he might find someone he loves because he bought a different shirt, all because of a shirt. Like, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it really is to some of these people. It's very important.
It is wild how such a small change can make such a big impact sometimes.
Huge.
What about AI? I've seen you post a lot about using AI in advertising, and it's come a long way. I still feel like a lot of AI feels still gimmicky a little bit. Are you finding that there are some ways where this can really truly get into the human psychology, not just, fluffy, creative, whatever?
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting topic because I'm starting to see, especially on some of the like stock photography sites, you can see the images that look AI. Like they're just a little too polished, right? Or they just look a little bit different than normal photography. So it's starting to become prevalent. I mean, it's basically everywhere now. I actually am running AI through a couple different brands that I consult for right now, and those ads are crushing. They're just crushing. But again, I'm very careful with what I run. Like it all goes back to that psychology piece of what are we going to run and what does that image actually say? So one of the ones we're running right now is actually an image of like a really dirty shoe. It's just a shoe. And I couldn't find a photographer quick enough to get me a dirty shoe picture, right? So I was like, we're just going to go to Midjourney and see what Midjourney creates. The image that it created is very stylized. It looks like sort of, I would say 1990s Nike kind of shoe, right?
Okay.
Where it just looks like somebody drew it, basically. But it was exactly what I wanted it to be, because psychologically it told the right story for me.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, that ad has been running for a couple months now, and it's like just crushing in there. So there is a place for AI. I will say, caveat to that, you have to be pretty good at prompting. You have to kind of understand what the input should be so that you get the right output. You can't just run basically anything that comes out of that. It's it's a technical side, which I think is interesting, because right now we're losing a lot of technical side in the media buyer realm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think all those media buyers should just shift straight over to the technical side of AI, and you'll be perfect, good to go, because we're going to need them.
One of the things that I think about when it comes to AI, and like you said, the right prompt, is that idea that a lot of people don't actually know what they want. And so they're putting prompts in there, but they don't know how to describe it. And they're hoping that this will all of a sudden just do it for them. You knew what you wanted. You're like, I want this old ugly shoe. And you're like, nope, that's still not what I want. And so you have this in your mind. And so you're giving it different prompts until you get to that point. But I think a lot of people are still looking for it to solve their creativity. And it's doing the best it can. And it reminds me of working with, let's say, ad creatives or just creative people in general, graphic designers. And you're like, no, it needs more pizzazz. And they're like, that's not a descriptor. Like, I need something to work from. And I think we're doing the same thing here. And it's just exposing that. And I always think of the quote from The Notebook, right? Where he's like, what do you want? What do you want? And I feel like that's AI asking
Oh my gosh,
us.
yes. I find it interesting too, because just going back to that one piece that you just said, adding more pizzazz is something I heard constantly, because I started my career as a graphic designer and then moved into generalized marketing. And I heard that constantly, like, it just needs some extra oomph. It just needs more, add something else to it to make it like pop. That's the word everybody uses. It just needs to pop more. And I just find it interesting, because clearly the direction that the graphic designers were getting was coming from a place of like, somebody had a vision in their mind that they couldn't communicate. It all comes down to communication, which is just funny to me. Even with AI, it's going to come down to communication. So I think AI has its place, and it's going to get more and more advanced and more usable. But it's not going to get usable until the people start to learn how to communicate.
So I want to ask you, what are the tools that you like, and what hints do you have for prompts? So let's start with the tools. What tools outside of Midjourney are you enjoying?
Really, I only use 2 tools. I feel bad. I should probably try a few more. Right now I'm using Chat GPT and Midjourney, and that is
both
it.
Top
I have
tier.
tested, well, and I've tested Bard. I've tested Google Bard for a little bit. And is it Bard or is it Bart?
Bard.
I think it's Bard.
B-A-R-D.
Bard. I keep like interchanging the two. It's okay. It does not come back with the same stuff that I need from Chat. It has like a different voice. Like, it just sounds
it's
different.
Not creative.
Which is interesting.
It's very factual. I picture it being like, it's got its, what's it like, pocket protector, and it's like, here's the right answer for you, sir. And it's like, okay, great, thank you. But it's not creative.
That's the most interesting part about it, is it just, which is weird. I'm like, you're Google. You should be as creative as anybody, because you have so many data points. But it goes to show you that no matter what, the creativity level of AI comes down to the creativity level of the person talking to it.
Yeah, totally.
And that comes down to communication. Can you actually tell somebody an idea and have them understand exactly what you are thinking? That's really difficult. It's a very hard skill to learn, is how to communicate what's inside your brain to another person and have them like directly come back with the same exact thing you just said.
Right. And so then, to that effect, are there things that you're using to help you improve your prompts, or how can somebody get better if they've got these visions in their head, but they aren't graphic designers, and so they don't know the right terms or phrases? How can somebody get to the point where they can get more out of AI prompts?
Yeah. One of the ones that I was using the other day, I'm going to have to send you the link to it. I can't remember what the link is currently. I have it bookmarked somewhere. It's basically a mid-journey prompt generator. So it will ask you predetermined to just determine these fields, right? What image do you want? What do you want in the image? What colors do you want? What kind of style do you want? Those type of things. Then you just click go and it will create the prompt for you. So that helps a little bit just to see how your prompt should be formulated. To get better at prompting, though, I think just takes practice.
Yeah.
And I'm on YouTube constantly, just seeing what the actual mid-journey creators are doing. And this, I know that like not everybody has a ton of time to just continuously like consume content. But if you have an extra 10 minutes, I would go on there and just type in mid-journey prompts, because there are people who are spending hours every single day just messing with the actual platform and talking to the AI. And it cuts down on time. So for me, I'm in chat every single day, mid-journey at least once or twice a week. So it just repetition more than anything else.
Yeah, just like anything else, if you're learning how to communicate with another human being, practice, get out there and involve. It's like with our kids, you've got kids too. It's like play dates, right? You're like, okay, you need to learn how to interact with this other human being. Same thing with AI. It's like start practicing interacting with AI.
Yep.
Okay.
And you just get better at it over time, I think. So
totally. I want to switch into a little bit about who is Sarah Levinger, because I like this part of the show as well. How do you deal with the stress of this job? This is a very stressful job.
It is a very stressful job. You don't. Sure. I would say you just don't. The interesting part about this industry, and I've seen this from almost everybody I've met over here, is the people that reside in D2C love the game. Yeah. Like they just like playing the game. Now, it's not necessarily the game of money. It's more the game of how big can I build? How far can I go? Right? Because they're really, if we're honest with ourselves, there's no end to this. Like this is infinity. You could literally build hundreds of thousands of businesses and never be done, because there's too many to actually like end it somewhere. You also could make billions of dollars and still never be done. Case in point, Jeff Bezos, like the guy's still not done and he's a billionaire. Yep. So I don't think you ever really handle the stress. I think you just get addicted to the game, which I got addicted to it when I was 22 and I'm still doing this. I'm going to be 35 this year. Like you just love it too much to quit. And I think that's the optimistic side of it. It's just, we all really just love this game. It's too much fun to stop playing. I think if you're the type of person that really loved the game of life as a child, or Clue, I loved Clue. Oh, it was just like, I gotta figure this out. You just want to figure the game out. So that's where I kind of lean towards every day when it gets hard, especially. I'm like, what can I do today that's just fun?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me a lot of what Simon Sinek has talked about as well, with, the finite game versus the infinite game, and just that idea where it's like, look, if you were happy to be able to go to school and get your A in a very finite, rule structured environment, there's going to be a challenge when you're all of a sudden in an infinite game and you will burn out. And I think I experienced that a little bit myself for a while, where it was like, I was very good at school. And then it's like, this is a little different, right? And you're like, you burn out and you're just like, okay, well, I achieved that. Now what?
Yeah.
Well,
and there's no structure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's just no structure over here. And that's the most interesting part. I've talked to people who own 9-figure brands, and I've talked to startups, and I've talked to SaaS and B2B and D2C. I've talked to everybody on the planet because I'm a consultant. So I'm lucky enough I get like insight to everybody. And everyone says the same exact thing. They're like, we have no idea what we're doing. We have no clue what's going on or what we should do next. We're making the next step, and the next step that we think is the correct one. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And you move forward because that's a part of this like process.
Yeah. Tell me about your childhood. What was it like for you growing up, and how do you think that has helped to shape you to be the woman that you are today?
Oh, gosh. I think I had a pretty like standard, I would say, childhood. I grew up with one brother. I have a half brother and I have a step brother, but I only grew up with like my full brother, Josh. And I had my mom and my dad at home, and all I remember is that they worked a lot. Like my poor parents were in that particular demographic of people, that my dad was a truck driver. So he drove all the time. Sometimes we wouldn't see him for like 3-4 weeks because he was just driving. Like that's how he made money. My mom bounced around a ton, but she was usually either admin work or like accounting. And she went back and actually got her master's, and like she's full on like accounting master at this point.
Awesome.
And I just remember a lot of them working really hard. So that was kind of always presented in the family, which I think is half the reason why I became an entrepreneur. Because like you follow what your parents do.
Yeah.
Even if you don't follow all of it, you usually follow the representation that you got as a child. So I think a lot of that followed me into this particular period of my life because I love working. I just really enjoy being in this office and like getting down into the work, which is just weird because my husband is the opposite. he he enjoys working, but he's like, I would so much rather be golfing right now. I don't know why we're
Sure.
working. This is just a waste of time. So that was a part of it. But honestly, and this is a weird step for me, I did not see myself as an entrepreneur until I got married. My husband's
Mm.
parents owned their own hotel in downtown Fort Collins where we live. And it was like a boutique 1920s, like really old, super cute, had 43, or not 40. Yeah, I think it had like 30 or 40 rooms in there. They renovated the entire thing. They bought it when my husband was like 12, renovated it all by themselves, and then ran this hotel for 13 years between the two of them.
Wow.
They had never owned a hotel. They never did hospitality before that. This was the very first time they'd ever done it. And they crushed it. Like it was just, that hotel did so well. And when we got married, I was 23, and they sold it when I was 28, I want to say 29. So I'd spent a good 7 years with them running the marketing and just being a part of the business in the front desk. And I was doing, hospitality, all kinds of different things. So I got a very clear picture of what it took to run a business.
Sure.
And that was something I had never got from my parents because they were kind of exchanging dollars for time, right? It was kind of that model.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember thinking, I don't necessarily want to trade time for money. I would so much rather own something that makes its own money. And that became pretty important to me. So I had kind of rich dad, poor dad a little bit in my lifespan, but
awesome.
They were both like super influential for sure.
Yeah. And it gave you the best of both worlds to be able to see both sides and see how to blend that.
Yep. 100%.
What do you fear?
Oh God. So many things. Besides heights, I when I was 16, this is really interesting. I remember having this thought from 16 all the way up to about 22, 23. I really was terrified of living kind of an unlived life. I was so terrified of being unfulfilled. Then I got into my 20s and I started to experience a little bit life more. And I started to get terrified of not being good enough. And that was all in my 20s because I had hustled for my entire 20s and nobody knew who I was because I never had a social presence. I never really told anybody I knew stuff. So I was just hustling 60, 70-hour work weeks in my freelance business, being burnt out all the time, so tired, and just thinking I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to see the kind of money I want to make. I'm never going to have the business I want. Now that I'm in my 30s, I'm honestly more afraid of going too hard at this in a stupid way. Right now, I am like terrified that I am hustling in the wrong direction. That scares me a lot because this is a lot of work. Like even just a consultancy, I don't own giant brands like Avi or, Fabletics or whatever it is. That in itself must be an undertaking. I'm a consultant, so my business is smaller. And even in my own business, I'm like, I don't know if this is the right direction. I'm making steps, but like, am I getting anywhere? I just have no idea. So I think it's just the fear of working towards nothing that's scaring me right now.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to. And I think the key is you're working towards something. One of the things that I remind myself, though, too, is that even if the destination of where you're working towards right now is not the destination that you'll end up, the skills that you're developing along the way will be used at whatever the next thing is, too. And I think that's 100%. The thing that I remind myself of often.
That's such a good reminder because really the entirety of my 20s was built on building skill set. I had to go through those 20s to get to where I am in my 30s. I would have never built this ecosystem had I not spent all of my 20s studying stuff. Yep. So it'll be interesting to see what of my 40s bring. Possibly my 30s are just to front my 40s. And that's fine too. It's all a learning game because we just don't know where this is going. And so most of the time I'm okay with that. Like this has led me to places I never would have dreamt for myself. but it's way better over here. It's just way better. So,
if I was in the office with you, what would I learn about you that I can't otherwise tell from your social media presence?
Gosh, in my office, probably that I'm like kind of a stickler for cleanliness.
Yeah.
Which is really odd because as a creative, I've noticed that creative offices usually have a lot of stuff in them, right? Like it's
Totally.
just creatives are usually really chunky with like their environments, which I think is great. Like they always add a ton of stuff on their desk. They have a lot of like knickknacks and things, lots of stuff hanging all over the walls. I have very little in my office. I think because I'm one of those weird brains that's analytical and creative at the same time. I have like a split brain and it drives me crazy sometimes because I can't handle clutter, but I am highly creative. So I just,
Have you ever done those tests?
I'm very
that say like, are you right brain or left brain? Have you ever done those tests?
Yes. And I always get like we don't know.
Yeah. I always get 50-50. It's like, I'm very much in the same boat with you there.
Which drives me a little crazy because now I can't plan anything. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like if I'm a creative, they always give you those, here's the jobs that would be right for you. And I'm like, but I'm both. So like, then what do I do with it? So, just make up your own job then. That's what I did.
Same. I'm right there with you. This has been a lot of fun. If you were going to give one more piece of advice to e-commerce stores that are trying to grow from 10 million to 100 million plus, they're reaching a plateau, they can't figure out what's next, and they're looking at this from the psychology side of things. What's that parting word that you would give them?
I would say open up your marketing. Open up your actual market base. Most of the time you hit a cap because you have infiltrated the entirety of one market set. If you hit that 5 million cap, if you've hit 25, if you've hit 50 or 100 and you can't get past it, it's mostly because you've already infiltrated the entirety of that market. The easiest way to open it up is to start targeting psychological, emotional targets and messaging that applies to lots of different markets, not just one.
That's brilliant. If people wanted to work with you, follow you, connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out, stay in touch?
So I am on Twitter literally all day long. So Twitter is probably the best place. That's at Sarah Levinger. I'm also at Sarah Levinger on LinkedIn. I'm on there quite a lot too. And then I do have a YouTube channel that I'm slowly starting to spin up. But outside of those two, sarahlevinger.co. You can go check me out over there. And I offer a lot of different things at this point. I'm trying to narrow down.
That's great.
There's so much of it. This is an intense year for Sarah. But yes, please come follow me. I just want to hang out with cool people.
That's a good thing. Sarah, it has been absolutely amazing talking to you today. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom with us. I appreciate it.
Yay! Thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you, everybody else. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.